This week we discovered that the NASCAR champions may be shutting down operations for 2019. We also discovered that Felipe Massa has an incredible ability to stick his foot in his mouth. And also, Fred Watch 2018 has become so red hot, the city of St. Petersburg, Florida has declared a state of emergency. This is This Week in Racing. So it broke in the middle of this week that Furniture Row Racing and the potential sale of the whole team to GMS, which currently participates in the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series of NASCAR, and was looking to make a move to the Cup Series full-time in 2019, will not go through. So this has sent a lot of rumors and a lot of speculation that Furniture Row Racing will be finished for 2019. Now, there's a lot to go over in this story because there's a lot of moving parts. But particularly, one of the things that's most interesting to me is the fact that it seems like the loss of 5 Hour Energy as a sponsor, which happened earlier in this year, has really sped up the process of potentially a team owner in Barney Visser who's not as interested in NASCAR as he previously was. He's pretty much accomplished everything you could possibly want to in NASCAR after winning the championship with Martin Truex Jr. last year. That being said, Furniture Road Racing has been one of the great stories of NASCAR in the past few years, and in fact, the past few decades, really, if you think about it. A small startup team which managed to get affiliated with Joe Gibbs Racing and really started producing a really top-flight organization. And there's a potential that they could double up their championship this year. Of course, Martin Truex Jr. has been one of the hottest drivers, one of the big three, as it's called in NASCAR, between Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch as well. And the potential that this team could have 2 championships and then be out of the series next season is something a little bit alarming. I'm not going to lie to you on that one. But at the same time, I'm not even sure there's really a precedent for that if it does indeed happen. I can't remember the last time a team was this dominant and then was just immediately disbanded. Now, I'm sure there is some precedent out there, or I'm just forgetting something. But this is fairly big news. And again, there's always the potential that they could find a sponsor and continue going. But again, from what I understand and from what I've been told, it just seems like this is the way it's starting to head. Now, what is going to happen with Martin Truex Jr.? What is going to happen with Joe Gibbs Racing? Because now we're at a point where Truex is very much entrenched in that Toyota camp. Toyota clearly doesn't want him to go. I think they'd be silly to let him go talk to Stewart Haas or talk to another big team that might be willing to move some of their other drivers out of the way to get a NASCAR champion, the caliber of Truex, of course. And it seems like Truex will stay in the Toyota camp and he'll be heading over to Joe Gibbs Racing. Now, of course, NASCAR has a rule that a team can only field 4 entries per season. Now, there's been a lot of debate about how fair that is or whether or not that's a good idea. A lot of that has to do with the charter system that came in around 2014, 2015. So what happens? Who's out? Who's on the out and out in Joe Gibbs Racing? Well, the rumor mill seems to suggest that it's going to be Daniel Suarez. And, of course, this kind of ties into a story we had 2 weeks ago with Casey Kane leaving NASCAR. That opens a seat at the 95 for Levine Family Racing. And there seems to be the prevailing thought that Suarez will be moved out of Joe Gibbs Racing. Of course, he was kind of a late call-up, if you will, to the 19 car when Carl Edwards suddenly announced his retirement. I would wonder if everybody has kind of known what the situation will be going forward for 2019, and that is why we saw Casey Kane leave. It's maybe not necessarily 100% Kane's choice. It may be because Toyota has decided to say, all right, well, Furniture Row is leaving the sport, but hey, Levine, if you put one of our drivers in there, in your team, and allow us to give you some engines and some feedback, kind of a Furniture Row satellite team style of, operation, they would be able to move Suarez out and bring Truex into Joe Gibbs Racing and essentially create an incredible super team over there with both Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. along with Denny Hamlin, and it seems like Eric Jones is really starting to come in his own. So there's a really, really strong team there potentially showing up. And I know guys like Kamikaze Games, heads are probably exploding at the idea of Kyle Busch and Martin Truex being teammates. But I feel like that's more likely than not. And I think the most likely possibility is what I've just laid out. Furniture Row closing next year, as hard as that is to believe, and as sad as that is to believe. Truex going to Joe Gibbs, and then Suarez taking over the 95, and that team becoming a Toyota team. Now, what are your thoughts on this? Are you excited to see the possibility of Truex in a top level, or I guess he's already in a top level team, but in a team with a lot of teammates? Of course, last time we saw that was at Michael Waltrip Racing. So it'll be interesting to see how this all works out. And certainly, this is pretty major silly season news in terms of NASCAR. And I'm actually surprised that more people haven't been talking about this as significant as a potential shakeup of everything as this is. So Felipe Massa came after IndyCar pretty hard on Twitter this week, kind of denouncing the safety elements of IndyCar versus F1. It was a direct comparison. He tagged everyone in it imaginable, and this is what the tweet read. When you see accidents like that happens in F1 and IndyCar in the last few years, we can say that F1 is always trying to improve with halo, track changes, virtual safety car, etc. to improve safety. And IndyCar is not doing much. He followed this up with a tweet that got a little bit less attention. It's unbelievable to see a circuit like Pocono, average speed of around 360 kilometers per hour, and then you see the walls low like that with the fences, so dangerous for the safety. Sorry to say that, but they need to look out for the safety of the drivers. At Robert Wickens. Honestly, pretty shitty that he would tag Robert Wickens in that. I'm sure Robert Wickens does not want to read that debate at this point, and also tagged IndyCar. And also, he responded to Dario Franchitti saying, "Brother, sorry to say, the work need to be harder from IndyCar on safety improvements, but if you see how many drivers got hurt in the last few years, very little changes have been done to improve. I hope things improve the right way for the safety of the drivers. Take care." So a lot of the big names from IndyCar came out and denounced this immediately, talking about a lot of the safety things that are kind of in the works at the moment, particularly the aero screen, since Massa specifically talked about the halo. And you have to look at this from the perspective of it's just a simple numbers game as far as I'm concerned. A lot of the perception that IndyCar is more dangerous than something like F1. You look at the amount of crashes that happen in IndyCar versus the amount of crashes that happen in F1. You will see a significant number less. That's simply because of the competition in IndyCar is closer. The competition in IndyCar, of course, takes place on oval tracks, and oval tracks generally lend themselves to more contact and accidents, and certainly the high-speed nature that Felipe Massa was suggesting. Now, I would make a counterpoint, the first of many counterpoints to Mr. Massa's assertion about the safety of an F1 car versus the safety of an Indy car. If you fired an F1 car into the catch fence at 220 miles an hour, I suspect you would probably get a similar, if not worse, result to what happened with Robert Wickens. Those are simply kind of the unfortunate factors of the current safety of barriers on the oval tracks. Now, I will agree with him, absolutely, and you know, as I talked about in my Pocono review, what needs to change on the oval tracks, and certainly we need to look at the fences. Absolutely. Completely agree with you, Felipe Massa. And then the wall, way too low at Pocono. I even said the walls need to be doubled at the ovals. Absolutely. At least in the corners, and maybe even on the straightaways where you have the spectators, they need to be doubled. Because, again, when a car rides along the top of the wall, it's just going to send it right into that catch fence. And some people have suggested to me, or said to me, that you wouldn't want to raise the walls because you wouldn't want to hit the wall after flying through the air. And I would suggest that it's much better to ride along a higher wall, even if the impact itself is fairly substantial. It's better than having that blunt force trauma of coming in and just smacking into a pole and having that car just stop. It's better to, keep that momentum up when you're crashing rather than, again, suddenly stopping. That's kind of the idea. And you may want to counter this by talking about what happened this morning with Marcus Ericsson in a dramatic barrel roll accident at Monza, where he was able to walk away fairly unscathed. And again, this is an accident where essentially the wall was contacted once and the car flipped through the grass. Now, certainly, after kind of watching the replay a few times, it appears like the halo actually did do a pretty good job of keeping his head from getting anywhere near the mud and the grass on the circuit. But then again, it could also be attributed to the roll bar. A lot of drivers were coming out after this accident and talking about the lack of safety in the DRS system, which is drag reduction. Of course, it's the wing flap that opens on the rear of the car, which in this accident failed, and which was actually caused it. It stayed open when Ericsson was under the braking for the slow chicane, coming down from 220 miles an hour to about 50, and having to do that with significantly less downforce than the car was designed for. So a lot of drivers were calling this out as an unsafe thing, and I tend to agree with them. There's a reason that active aero or active aerodynamic parts have been banned in most racing series. It's because they're unpredictable and they're fairly dangerous. And it's kind of funny that Felipe would talk about the danger elements in IndyCar when they don't do things like DRS and have the potential of something like that failing on a very fast straightaway when you're coming down and braking into a corner. So yeah, sure, Felipe, IndyCar's got a long way to go. I'm not denying that one. But to act like F1 is free from criticism or outside of the glass house to throw stones in is a bit silly, to say the least. And wrapping up with some positive news, some very positive news. We finally got the official confirmation of the officially worst kept secret in IndyCar is that Fernando Alonso will indeed be testing a modern Verizon IndyCar next week at an unspecified location, according to Zach Brown, of course, the CEO of McLaren. It's kind of funny how when Fernando left F1, some people were speculating that, hey, maybe McLaren won't be involved with Fernando going forward. I think I may have even possibly floated some of that. But here we go, Zach Brown making a pretty bold statement that, yeah, we're testing him in an IndyCar at an unspecified location. Now, if you listen to Robert Miller, you listen to a lot of the IndyCar in the know people, a lot of people much more in the know than I am, they say Barber, that's where it's going to be. And it would make sense, of course, that was the first place where Fernando was making his kind of IndyCar public debut when he showed up there last season. And it's certainly a course that you would think that Fernando is really going to get a great taste of what it's like to drive an IndyCar, where you can really put it through its paces on a natural terrain road course. Now, that being said, there's speculation that this test could take place at Indianapolis. It could take place at Sonoma. There's definitely a couple places where it could take place, but I suspect I'm going to agree with the journalists and say that. Now, what's interesting is that this test, unlike most of the other Fernando circus elements that have kind of happened with IndyCar and even F1 to this point, this is not going to be open to the public. So everybody's going to be trying to get spy shots, I guess, of this mythical test. And it's going to be fairly interesting to see how he does. And it's fairly interesting that they're keeping the press out of this one. It's almost as if this is a real, I mean, this has gone from a publicity stunt, which was kind of what the first Indy 500 run was, to this is serious. And this also suggests to me that there are probably going to be some McLaren people involved in this test, and they don't want the prying eyes of photographers and videographers to be able to say, okay, who is here? Who's here? Who's not here? Who's working on this program? What are they doing? What are they looking at? What data are they going over? Now, what's also going to be interesting is whether or not this is a Chevy or a Honda program. Now, everything seems to suggest that this is going to be an Andretti car, which would also imply that it'll be a Honda power plant, which, of course, we know there's a little bit of history between Fernando and Honda. You don't say. But there's also the rampant rumors, I guess you could say, at this point, that Harding Racing is going to be a two-car team next year, but they're not going to be called Harding Racing anymore. They're going to be called something called McLaren. Yeah, so this could be very interesting. Now, the question, of course, also kind of comes out and says, who's going to be driving for McLaren next year alongside Fred? Who knows? This is all very exciting news on the IndyCar front, talking about Fernando coming next year, because, again, the lack of press at this event suggests to me this is a very, very serious endeavor here. This is not about publicity. This is about going fast and winning races come next season. So that was another week in racing. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to hit the like on this video. Be sure to let me know down in the comments what you thought and kind of your thoughts about some of the topics and maybe some of the topics we didn't cover in this video. And also subscribe for more auto racing content. Going to be a lot coming down the pipeline, so hope to see you there. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube, and we'll see you in the next video. Fred Watch 2018 is a rolling on.